Hello everyone and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Today in this session we are going to have a discussion on the newspaper analysis of 4th of April 2024. So let's begin with a look at all the articles that we are going to have a discussion on. First we have these two articles for detailed analysis. The first one is regarding Iran's options against Israel, and then with regard to what role nuclear power is supposed to play if we want a net zero carbon emission by 2070. So these are the two articles that we are going to discuss in detail. Apart from that, there are these 5 articles from the perspective of your prelims examination. First, with regard to VVPAT, we'll discuss about it. Then something called as what is living will. Then India rejecting the report on shrimp. So we'll discuss about the shrimp business of India. And then with regard to telescopes on moon, there is an article on the science page. And then finally one article about arms embargo on Israel. So these are the 5 articles from the prelims perspective today. There are no articles from the revisited headlines because this first article that we are discussing could have been a revisited headline, but we are going to discuss this in detail because of the developments that we are seeing between Iran and Israel. Now let's try to understand where we are right now. We know that there is an ongoing conflict in Gaza between Israel and Palestine. Now in this regard, we also know that Israel is acting against Gaza, it's acting in Gaza against Palestine, but at the same time, Israel always has been seeing Iran as a very big threat in this entire region. And it says that it is like an octopus. According to Israel, Iran is like an octopus, something like this. And what they say, according to these are the kinds of images that come from Israel. Now what Israel says is that Iran is like an octopus because it is fighting a proxy war against Israel, according to Israel. So it says that all the different kinds of militia group that exist in this region, they are also, all of them are also related to Iran, and at the same time Israel is fighting you can say multilateral war with regard to not only Palestine but all these militia groups as well, which are backed by Iran. So that is the side of Israel. Now what we saw recently was that there was an attack that happened in Syria, and this happened near the Iran consulate, and this is where we saw that some people who belonged to Iran, they lost their lives. There were 13 people from Iran who lost their lives. Now after this, what Iran has been saying is that this is the time that we are going to retaliate. Now when they say that we are going to retaliate, what are the options that this Iran has? This is what we need to understand, that where do we stand right now with regard to this entire scenario that has been created. One thing, when they say that we are going to retaliate, does that mean that it's going to take a phase of an arms conflict between Iran and Israel? That is one thing that we have to note. And then there are some of the other options perhaps that Iran has. So we'll need to understand what these options could be. And going forward, as Iran says that we are going to retaliate, what are the ways in which they can retaliate? What are the things that they can retaliate? So now what we know is that the situation following the airstrike that happened on Iran's consulate in Damascus, which has resulted in the death of at least 13 individuals from Iran, is something that we need to understand the value of. Now overall, when it comes to this is where we understand that this scenario, when we look at this scenario, we understand that this has raised significant question about Iran's potential response to Israel. And Iran has vowed that they would retaliate, yet many of the experts have suggested that its capacity for a direct military confrontation with Israel is very constrained. And there are various different factors because of which these constraints come. First, with regard to the economic conditions and all the political dynamics that we see here. The response of Iran is anticipated to be measured, and it would be aiming for a very symbolic action perhaps, rather than engaging directly in an extensive military conflict. And the primary reason why we think something like this would happen is that Iran would try to focus on its long-term objective on first and foremost development of nuclear capabilities and desire and avoid, and that's why they would desire to avoid a full-scale war at this point of time. And this kind of full-scale war, if it happens, it might destabilize the position that Iran has right now. So that's why when we look at the options, all right, when we look at the options, and if we think that a direct conflict, a direct military conflict, if let's say we see this as an option, can at all this be seen as an option is the question. Now in this regard, when we look at this direct military action as a response, first thing, this is going to cause an economic destabilization. It may cause an economic destabilization when it comes to Iran. And in this particular scenario, many of the experts argue that they might not want something like this. It will have a lot of, it will lead to a lot of political issues as well. And we see that from the perspective of geopolitics, it is going to involve a lot of other players as well. For example, US is not going to just stand by in such a scenario, because US already, you might know, if you look at the present history, you'll see that for the last 5-6 years at least, US constantly has been saying something or the other against Iran. You will see that the roots are back in Barack Obama's time, and from that time we have seen that Iran has been in the watch list of US, and after that during Donald Trump's time, and after that during the present regime as well, we see that this is where US constantly has been after Iran, because first and foremost US has been saying that Iran is developing a nuclear weapon, although Iran has been saying that we are not, but the enrichment levels according to US has gone up to 90%, meaning that they now are, or Iran now is ready with an nuclear arms. So that's why one of the ways in which these kind of things will play out is, if a direct military conflict happens, first, Iran is not strong enough. We have to understand this, that Iran is not strong enough to fight against Israel, and at the same time there will be many other players who will start backing Israel in this war, and US will get a chance. And this is something that we have seen in the past as well, that this is where US will get a chance to act against Iran. So that's why we see that, that's why many of the experts have argued that Iran is going to prioritize the attainment of a nuclear weapon first, and then after that they would try to make a strategic deterrence against both Israel and the United States at the same time, rather than pursuing an immediate and direct military retaliation against Israel. Now, on the other hand, there is Hezbollah, and when it comes to Hezbollah, which is, you also know that this Hezbollah is also an Iran-backed Lebanese military group, or militant group, not military group, a militant group. Now, in this particular regard, when we talk about Hezbollah, understanding how Hezbollah could be used in these kind of scenarios is also important for us. Now, overall, when it comes to the use of Hezbollah, we have to understand that this is where, which is a Lebanese militant group which is backed by Iran. There is a very general consensus among all the experts that a major escalation against Israel is very unlikely. And despite possessing a very significant arsenal of rockets and missiles that Hezbollah has, Hezbollah perhaps is one of the biggest armed militia group in the world. And that's why Hezbollah is thought to be very cautious of triggering a very widespread conflict with Israel, especially given the fact that the current geopolitical context, and given the fact that when it comes to the present scenario, they know that there will be a huge retaliation against them from Israel if at all they also go with a direct arms conflict with Israel. So that's why the option of Hezbollah also may not be a direct option that Iran would look for right now. Now, at the same time, we also need to understand that Iran might also try to explore some of the other avenues for retaliation. Maybe a cyber warfare, which has been going an ongoing domain of conflict between Israel and Iran right now. Cyber attacks could serve as a very basic means for Iran also to assert its opposition without engaging in any direct military conflict. And at the same time, it allows it to strike at Israel's interest indirectly. And that's why the decision on the exact nature of what Iran's response it's all something that lies with the Iranian administration right now. But at the same time, when it comes to the prevailing view among all the analysts, is that Iran will opt for something which is very strategic in nature, a strategy that avoids any kind of direct military escalation, and it will try to focus instead on a symbolic gesture, a direct, not a direct but an indirect action through maybe proxies or possible cyber attacks, so all the while continuing to advance its nuclear ambitions as of now. So that's why we understand that these probably are the kinds of things that we might see from the perspective of Iran rather than a direct conflict. And that's why we see that many of the experts, they also have said that Israel's attack, the recent attack that happened, that was done by Israel, it was also to show that Iran is not what it shows. Some of the experts who are taking this Israel sides in these kind of scenarios, they are saying that this was in a manner, it was to project that this Iran is a paper tiger. According to Israel, that Iran is a paper tiger and it is not going to do anything. And that's why we also see that this when we look at the options that Iran has and what Iran might do against Israel, we see that these are areas where we might see that they might maintain a strategic silence. They might maintain a strategic silence rather than actually retaliating with force, with military. And rather than that, they would want a long-term build-up of its military, of its power, of its nuclear arsenal, to ensure that in the future they have that strategic position where Israel will also think twice before doing any kind of or attacking any of the things that are related to Iran at all. So that's why we need to understand how exactly the things might go up. So that's why this article also says the same thing, that the recent strikes, basically they are a part of broader strategy of Iran to broader strategy of Israel to counter Iran, all right, to counter Iran and all the militia that are actually supported by Iran. And in this case, that's why Iran always has been mentioned as an octopus. It has been mentioned as an octopus by Israel, and saying that Iran basically is the head and all the militia allies basically are the tentacles of Iran. So this is basically what we have seen, and we have seen that Israel has intensified the attacks on actions against Iran in all these things, and in this case it has in a manner also signaled that Israel is ready. Israel is ready for a direct confrontation with Iranian influence, and that's why many of the experts also believe that this kind of attacks that is being done by Israel, it's also to provocate Iran. That it's also to provocate Iran, that if at all, let's say Iran gets provocated and it does a military attack, this is where Israel is already sitting ready. That you come with an attack, you come with a force, we are sitting ready for this, and this is what we want. So if Iran at all attacks Israel in this particular scenario, it will be playing into the hands. It will be playing into the hands of Israel, because Israel is sitting ready, and these kind of attacks probably indicate Israel's readiness in all this particular scenario. So that's why Iran will take a measured step, is what many believe, that it might not go with the kinds of aggression that is being spoken of by the Iranian leadership. It might not so happen, but rather there will be a measured approach. There may be a symbolic retaliation, but rather than a direct retaliation or a direct military conflict at all. So that's why we have to understand where we are sitting right now in this particular issue. Now coming to another article, and this article is on page number 12. Nuclear power is key to development, says study. Now, what study are we speaking of? This is the study, and this is a new study that was done by IIM Ahmedabad, and it was funded by NPCIL. So IIM Ahmedabad and Nuclear Power Corporation of India. We see that this is where this is the report. This is the name of the report: Synchronizing Energy Transitions Towards Possible Net Zero for India, Affordable and Clean Energy for All. Now, this is a report. This is a 240-page report that was published. And it was actually brought forward yesterday by the government. And there are few highlights of this report that we should know. That what are the basic things that the report talks about. Obviously, you cannot go through the 240-page report, and also it's a very technical report, a huge data-based report and statistically supported report, so it's not easy to read report and not required for you to read the report. But there are these highlights of the report. First, the report says that there is no silver bullet to achieve a net zero, and that's why there are multiple pathways. There are multiple pathways that we need to look into, and then only we would be able to understand where we are and where we need to head. And at the same time, it also talks about coal and says that for the next 2 decades, coal still is going to be very, very important, and it is going to be the backbone of the Indian energy system, at least for the next 20 odd years. And when it comes to the net zero emission that we want, without substantial nuclear power and nuclear energy generation by 2070, net zero perhaps will not be possible. So that's why we need to understand where exactly do we stand right now, and where do we want to go ahead. So that's why there are all these things that have been mentioned in this particular report. These are the certain highlights of this report. Now, overall, when it comes to this report, it has a complete chapter on nuclear power. That this study that was conducted by the academics at the IIM Ahmedabad, and it has been funded by the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor and NPCIL. Now, this report basically has highlighted the critical role that nuclear energy is going to play if we want the kinds of things that we have said, that we want to achieve zero carbon dioxide emission by 2070. And right now what we see is that the total nuclear power that we have, or the total nuclear energy that we account for, is just 1.6% of India's energy mix. And that's why this study has been advocating for significant investment in nuclear energy and infrastructure advancement altogether. So that's why when it comes to the report also has talked about the various different scenarios, whether it comes to the kind of economic growth that we might see, that in a low growth scenario, what are the options, in a high growth scenario, what are the options. So that's why it has talked about fossil fuels and the carbon capture technique, the carbon capture and storage, that is sequestration techniques, the renewable energy sector as well. So that's why all these things have been spoken of, yet nuclear energy, according to them, is going to play a very important role. Now, in this particular regard, they basically applied a mathematical model to come to this kind of a conclusion. Now, overall, when it comes to an optimum scenario, it is something which involves the total, you can say, it basically comes down to how much of reduction in emission can be done from carbon dioxide. Now, overall, what it says is that overall, when it comes to carbon dioxide, India's emission would range between 0.56 billion tons carbon dioxide to 1 in 2070, and this also requires a very significant increase in nuclear power capacity to at least to up to 30 gigawatt by 2030, and then it is going to drastically increase to almost, you can say, making going up to 265 gigawatt, by 2000. So first, to start with, almost you can say 30 gigawatt in 2030 to going up to 265 gigawatt by 2050. this is what we need. And that's why, and by this time it will start making up for almost 30% of energy requirements that India has. And if we have 30 gigawatt, it means that we are actually looking at a 4% of the entire scenario. Now overall what we see is that this is where we see that this scenario is where we are trying to increase the total energy that nuclear energy is able to give us. Now all these targets, getting to these targets, this will mean that we have to at least double the investments that we are doing in the nuclear energy sector, and also ensuring the availability of uranium. Despite we see that there are different things that we are doing, but ultimately we need to have more of uranium imports as well to phase down coal, because ultimately to phase down coal we will need all this infrastructure, and then only it becomes possible for India to get into a scenario where we are able to save or we are able to get to a scenario of net zero emission altogether. So that's why these are some of the parts of the studies that we have seen as a part of this emission. So report, just remember that these are the things that have been highlighted in the report, these 2 pages, these 2 slides, this one and this one. You can just go through it because these are direct data points that you should know of. And then the article basically talks about all this. So we discussed about the fact that it has been funded by the Principal Scientific Advisor and NPCIL, and the report has been published by and prepared by Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. So overall, that's why what we are saying is that we have to fall to almost 0.55 billion tons by 2070, and we will need almost 265 gigawatt by 2050. And this is how to get all this. We will need certain investments, that India will need an investment of 150 to 200 lakh crore rupees between 2020 to 2070 for the energy system transition that we need if we want to achieve a net zero transition altogether. Now overall in this regard, there are certain other developments also which become very crucial, because when it comes to the developments that we have seen right now, there is something which has been in the news constantly, that India's first indigenous fast breeder reactor begins core loading and why it matters. This was an article that was published in the Indian Express on 15th of March. And we also had a certain discussion based on the fast breeder reactors and why it becomes important. So the core loading has been done in the Kalpakam fast breeder reactor, and that's why it makes a critical milestone in India's 3-stage nuclear power program. So now in this particular regard, just understand where we are right now. When it comes to this entire scenario of what the report also says, that we have to significantly improve our scenario of nuclear energy. To get to this scenario, we see that fast breeder reactor plays a very, very important role. And what is a fast breeder reactor? A fast breeder reactor is a kind of reactor where you are able to get more fuel than what you consume. So for example, let's say the vehicles that you run on, any, let's say your car, bike, scooter, whatever you have. So in that, if you're, let's say you are using 1 liter of petrol, in some time that 1 liter of petrol will be utilized in transportation, correct? And then you go and refill. But in case of how fast breeder reactor works is, just imagine that 1 liter of petrol that you have used in your car, that 1 liter of petrol is able to produce another liter of petrol. And then you can use that liter of petrol, that 1 liter that was produced by the car itself, again back as a fuel. So if that was the scenario, if you could do that at all, just imagine the kind of happiness perhaps you will feel, right? So in this particular scenario of a fast breeder reactor, this is what happens, that in the nuclear reactor we use some fuel, and the fuel that we use produces more fuel. It will be able to produce more fuel. So for example, we use plutonium, all right? We use plutonium as a fuel in the fast breeder reactors, and this plutonium once used produces more of plutonium, and that's why that plutonium can be used over and over again. So that's the beauty of fast breeder reactors, and it becomes the 2nd stage of India's 3-stage nuclear program. So that's why it becomes very crucial, because when it comes to the 3-stage nuclear program, the basic idea here is to start using thorium. We want to start using thorium as fuel. We want to start using thorium as fuel instead of using uranium, because we just discussed about the fact that we'll have to also increase our imports of uranium. Ultimately what happens is that uranium in India is very limited. There are only few mines where in India uranium mining is done. So largely the uranium that we need for nuclear energy is what we import. So that's not an ideal scenario. When we want to increase our capacity altogether with nuclear energy, depending only on uranium is not a good idea. So that is where we see that the role of fast breeder reactors and the role of thorium etc. becomes very, very crucial. So in this regard, moving away from uranium based nuclear reactors where we are right now, you can say that this fast breeder reactor is the first step towards achieving our reduced dependence on uranium. So that's why this is very, very crucial, and now we see that we have started coming closer to that we can start using the fast breeder reactor, which is not right now not in commercial domain, but very soon expected to be in the commercial domain. So this becomes the second stage of India's 3-stage nuclear program, and in the third stage, once we reach the third stage, is where we'll start using thorium altogether and completely remove the requirements of uranium altogether. So that is basically what the agenda is for India, that we ultimately move towards thorium. And why do we want to move towards thorium? Because India has huge reserves of thorium. India has one of the largest reserves of thorium in the world, and that's why we want to move away from uranium and towards thorium in this entire nuclear program. And this is a requirement because the kinds of targets that we have, for achieving those targets, it is very, very necessary that we get to a scenario where thorium becomes usable. Now coming on to the articles that we have for the prelims examination, the first article here is Supreme Court to list before polls, please to verify count in all EVMs. Now in this regard, what the Supreme Court of India has said is that they have decided to expedite the hearing of the petitions that have advocated for a comprehensive cross-verification of the votes which have been casted in the EVMs. And all this should be done by counting all these votes in VVPAT, or what we call as voter verifiable paper audit trail, VVPAT. Now what basically they are saying is that there will be cross verification of all the votes that have been cast in the EVMs with the help of VVPATs or the VVPAT slips that we have before in the case of the upcoming Lok Sabha election that have been scheduled to start on the April 19th. Now this action is a response to requests from various different petitions, and that is where we see that they all have including notable advocates like Kapil Sibbal and Prashant Bhushan. They all have been a part of these petitions, and they argue that for enhanced transparency in the electoral process, we need to ensure that the Supreme they also referred to a previous Supreme Court judgment and emphasized that a paper trail for ensuring free and fair elections is a requirement. Currently, the VVPAT process or the VVPAT slips, the process is just limited to VVPAT slips only from 5 polling stations in each of the assembly constituencies. But the petitioners have been seeking that there should be a more thorough verification to enhance the voter confidence in the electoral process altogether. And one specific petition also has challenged Election Commission's guidelines that mandates the sequential VVPAT verifications as well, and that's why they have suggested that instead of simultaneous verification, suggested that simultaneous verification could be more efficient, and that's why they have advocated for utilization of additional personnel also for this entire purpose. So this basically is what we have seen in this particular regard right now, that the Supreme Court has agreed to fast track the hearings on the petitions on the VVPATs, and in this case what is required or what has been asked for is an increase in transparency of the voting process, so that there is a paper trail of every vote that has been cast in the electronic voting machines or the EVMs. So in this particular scenario, there will be a paper trail for each and every vote that has been cast in EVMs. So that is basically what they have said, that overall, although we see that there are investments that already have been done by the government, but current guidelines only slips from about 20,000 VVPATs are verified altogether. So this is basically where we are right now, and this is what the petitions have asked for, that there should be a paper trail for each and every vote that is being cast. Now, when it comes to this VVPAT, what do we mean by VVPAT? VVPAT basically stands for Voter Verifiable Paper Audit Trail. Alright. Now, this basically becomes a method that tries to provide a feedback to the voters using a ballotless voting system. Now, in this context, or in the context of EVMs, a VVPAT system basically generates a paper slip that shows the symbol of the party for which any vote has been cast. And that's why this slip then can also be seen by the voter through there is a transparent window, and through the transparent window they'll be able to see the vote that they have cast. And that's why this there is the VVPAT machine, and this VVPAT machine cannot be taken out of the entire system. So that's why we see that after a few seconds the paper slip automatically will also fall into a sealed box which is attached to the VVPAT machine, and that's why this will ensure the confidentiality of the vote that has been cast. So as you can see here, if you see that once the vote has been cast to this particular symbol, the VVPAT paper shows this kind of a symbol in the VVPAT machine, and this paper once has been shown, the voter can also see that okay, fine, this is what it is, and then after that this paper slip will fall. It will basically fall into the VVPAT machine, and in this manner you can later on verify the number of votes that have been cast via EVMs, and if the same number of vote for a particular party is also being shown by the VVPAT. So this is basically what has been asked for, that make it a completely transparent system, that for instead of just counting for certain number of VVPATs, just count for each and every vote that is being cast in this particular election. So that is basically what the petition says, and let's see where the Supreme Court goes and what Supreme Court says, but this is where we are right now with regard to the VVPATs. Now coming to another article, and this is again on page number 12. India rejects report on abusive conditions at shrimp hatcheries. Now in this particular regard, we are talking about shrimps. Now when it comes to shrimps, we need to understand what exactly do we see with shrimps and where we are with the shrimp business. Overall, when you look at the shrimp, some of the important points, if you see, the seafood exports from India in 2022-23 has totaled almost 8.09 billion, and that's where we see that shrimp export makes up to $5.6 billion. Now India's share in the US shrimp market has increased to almost 40% and amounts to almost $2.4 billion. So that's why in this regard we understand that the shrimp business in the seafood business plays a very, very important role in the case in India's case. Now when it comes to the shrimp business, what we also see is that in this regard, Andhra Pradesh itself contributes to almost 70% of India's shrimp production, and we see that women hold almost 70% of the jobs in the sector. So now when it comes to the report that was published, India has also asked, the government has also asked the Andhra Pradesh government to investigate all the allegations that we have in the report, and if there are any steps that are needed to be taken. Although India has completely said that this report does not actually this report is completely taken out of context, and this report is something that is suggesting something which does not exist at all, and India also has asked for some independent studies in this particular regard as well. So that basically is where we are. So that's why the government has also asked the state of Andhra Pradesh government to look into the allegations that have been made in this particular Corporate Accountability Lab or CAL report. So this is basically where we are right now. Now overall, when it comes to the shrimp business, you will see that India has a very significant shrimp business altogether. That India's seafood, if this is again a PIB extract that I've taken from June 2023 report, that India's seafood exports, they have touched an all-time high in the last financial year, and they have grown 26.73% in terms of quantity and 4.31% in terms of value from the last financial year. And that's why overall we see that the largest importer has been USA. Apart from that, we see that China, European Union, Southeast Asia, Japan and the Middle East, they also are significant importers of shrimp from India. So that's why we see that frozen shrimp retains the top position as the major export seafood item for India. So that's why you have to understand that when it comes to the entire business of seafood that India has, shrimp business plays a very, very important role in all that, and that is where we are currently, and hence it becomes very crucial for India to also understand if these reports mean something and if there can be any repercussions of these reports. That's why we see that quickly we have commented on the report as well, and at the same time we have also asked the state of Andhra Pradesh to also look into the viability of the report and if there are anything that needs to be taken care of in terms of this particular report. Now overall, now this is again another article that we have on page number 18, that is India among countries mulling telescopes on and around the moon. Now when it comes to the moon becomes a very, very crucial aspect of you can say altogether when it comes to if we want to do any kind of studies of the outer space. Now why moon? Because first and foremost we know that moon does not have any atmosphere, right? Moon does not have any atmosphere, and at the same time moon does not have an atmosphere is one thing, but at the same time what we also see is that moon has many craters, right? You know that there are big craters that moon has, and these craters can actually be used to set up telescopes. And hence we have seen that many of the countries have shown their interest in setting up telescopes in the craters of the moon. Now in this particular regard, when it comes to this, so what we have seen is that there have been global interest that has been shown, and worldwide astronomers have actually been proposing that we should place optical and radio telescopes on the moon. And in this particular regard, especially the far side of the moon offers a very pristine environment. Why? Because it is completely free from Earth's noises. It is something and even atmospheric interferences are not there, and at the same time it is ideal for clear uninterrupted cosmic observations altogether. And also remember, when it comes to the far side of the moon, we never get to see the far side of the moon, right? So in this particular regard, it becomes very crucial for us to also understand that why this part becomes very crucial, because there is no atmospheric interference, there is no pollution, there is no atmosphere on the moon, so all that makes the observations way clearer altogether. So that's why we see that these are the things that we are looking to solve from the So that's why we see that today there are key projects that have been taken by different parts of the world. So just understand these parts, and just from prelims perspective, the names of these projects can be important. So first, NASA's Lucy Night, the Long Baseline Optical Imaging Interferometer. So this is one project of NASA which is looking towards this particular scenario. Then at the same time we have the European Space Agency's Argonaut lunar lander and an infrared telescope. Then China also has been looking towards a radio telescope, and this is where we see that India, most importantly, we see that there is this particular project by India that is called as Pratyush, and this Pratyush basically plans to orbit the moon and try to offer ideal conditions for studying the universe's early stages with very minimal interferences. So that is where we see that there are all these projects today, and all these projects are looking towards the moon and setting up some kind of telescope or some kind of space observation instrument on the moon. So that is where we are right now with regard to this. Then on page number 14, we have UNHRC to discuss call for Israel arms embargo. Now overall, when it comes to this, understand where we are again in this particular scenario. Now for the first time what we have seen is that there is a call for putting for an arms embargo on Israel, citing plausible risk of genocide in Gaza. Now overall, when it comes to this, we have seen that it is something, when it comes to this draft has been supported by many of the countries in the UN, and it is a draft that was brought forward by Pakistan. It was Pakistan that led this draft, and after that we saw that there are other countries also that have supported this draft altogether. Now overall, when it comes to this draft becomes very crucial, because for the first time we see that UNHRC has taken such or at least has initiated this kind of a resolution. So if the draft resolution is adopted, it would mark the first time that United Nations rights body has taken any position on the war that is raging in Gaza. Now in this regard, we understand that there are all these countries, many of these countries that have supported something like this, but at the same time it may not be that easy that they'll be able to get this resolution passed, because we do know that there are many of the other countries that are going to go and act against this kind of a this kind of a resolution, and that's why it's not going to be easy for many of these countries to just go and do whatever they want here. So that's why it's not going to be that easy from the perspective of this particular resolution. Now overall, when it comes to the understanding of this resolution, what we see basically is that first, that there is an call for an arms embargo on Israel, and this is where for the first time we have seen that this kind of step at least is being taken in this particular regard, and it was forwarded by Pakistan for the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And this is where we see that there are some countries which have not supported it, but at the same time we have seen that there is a strong support from many of the other countries. Then it has demanded to, first just understand what are the demands. First, it has demanded an end to Israel's occupation of Palestine territories, and at the same time lifting of Gaza's blockade as well. And then it also calls for countries to stop the arms, the munitions, and also the military equipment sales for Israel, into Israel, because we have seen that many of the countries, European countries, US, etc., they have been all the while supporting Israel, and they have been also providing their arms to Israel, and that also fuels the entire conflict from the side of Israel. So that also is one problem. And then it also calls for condemning the use of starvation as a warfare and Israeli action that could amount to ethnic cleansing of this particular area altogether. And then it also has urged for support for the funding and also halt the Israeli settlement expansions that are happening in the Palestine areas. So that's why there are all these things, and these are the steps that are supposed to be taken altogether in this particular regard. So that's why when it comes to the understanding of this particular this particular draft, it becomes crucial for us to understand that UN for the first time now is looking towards getting to this kind of a scenario where it might take an action based on this draft resolution. Now the next thing that will happen here is that there will be a discussion that will happen in this particular regard to understand whether or not it is something that they want to go forward with. But again, we have to see where exactly this goes. Now the question is, what do we first and foremost, what do we mean by an arms embargo, right? We are talking about that there is an arms embargo. Arms embargo. What is an arms embargo? Arms embargo basically is a restriction or a set of sanctions that are imposed by one or more countries against a specific country or a group. Alright, so this basically is called as an arms embargo. So what is it? It is a restriction. Alright, it is basically what? It is a restriction or a set of sanctions. Restrictions or a set of sanctions. Restrictions or a set of sanctions that are imposed by one or more countries against a specific country or a group, and in this particular regard it will try to prohibit the sale, supply, transfer or export of the arms and the military equipment. So it tries to basically, what it does is it tries to prohibit the sale, alright, it tries to prohibit the sale, the supply, the transfer or export of any kind of arms or military equipment. So this is basically what we mean by an arms embargo, and these measures, they basically are taken as a form of political pressure which are intended to influence the behavior of a certain targeted country. So especially in the context of the conflict or human rights abuses, we see that these kind of measures are brought forward, and these arm embargoes, they can also be implemented by individual countries as well, and at the same time multilateral organizations can also do it. So that's why United Nations can do it, European Union, if it wants, it can do it. So all this will try to aim to prevent the escalation of any kind of conflict and try to reduce the violence or promote peace and stability in any given particular region. Now, are there cases of arm embargoes that have happened in the past? The answer is yes. That you'll see that there has been a history of arms embargo. First and foremost, you will see that when the invasion of Kuwait happened, when Iraq had invaded Kuwait back in 1990, this is where an arms embargo was put against Iraq. So we see that in 1990s, you will see that against Iraq, an arms embargo was put when it invaded Kuwait. Then after that, we see that even in the Balkan conflict that had happened in the 1990s, even there, the former Yugoslavia that we had back then, there was an arms embargo that was put on Yugoslavia as well. At the same time, we have seen that Somalia also has been put under arms embargo after the civil war that started in Somalia. So that's why we have seen in Iraq, we have seen in the former Yugoslavia also. Alright, so we have seen something like this in Yugoslavia. We have seen this happen in Somalia as well, and this happened once the civil war started, and this was also back in 1992 only. And then after that, we see that in I think Liberia also there was one arms embargo that was put. Then Democratic Republic of Congo also, we see that there was an arms embargo that was put. So all these areas, whether it is Democratic Republic of Congo or Sudan or Liberia, in all these cases, wherever anything related to humanitarian crisis has happened, we have seen that arms embargo has been put in all these areas. So that's why Democratic Republic of Congo, then in case of Liberia, in case of Sudan, in all these cases, even in case of Libya. In case of Libya, in 2011, you might know that there was an uprising that happened against Gaddafi's regime, and at that point of time also we see that against Libya there was an arms embargo that was put. So that's why we have seen that there have been all these cases of arms embargo in the past, and let's see what happens in the future and where it is headed altogether. Now, lastly, coming to the mains questions of the day, there are these two questions. The first question: discuss the potential consequences of Iran's strategic restraint in the face of Israeli provocations, considering the broader geopolitical context. So we discussed about the kinds of things that Iran can do, what are the options for Iran, and what are the repercussions of those options. Can it go for a direct military conflict? So we discussed that there are various problems that will happen if they actually want to go for a direct conflict. Then at the same time, if at all there is a possibility that they'll be able to go, they will be do something that is indirect, the proxy war anyway, that is that they have been raging against Israel. So maybe that is something that they see as an option, or something like a cyber attack is what they see as an option. So there are a lot of things, and how exactly all these things can play out is also to be understood. Then assess the potential role of nuclear energy in India's pursuit of becoming a developed country by 2047 and achieving net zero carbon dioxide emission by 2070. So we discussed about the fact that to bring down carbon dioxide, we need to have other resources, and that is where nuclear energy has to play a very, very important role. Right now in the mix, it's just around 1.6%, which we have to drastically take up to at least up to 30% if we want that we can take the pressure off coal-based resources. So that's why we have to analyze all that aspect, and you have to write a balanced answer in this particular regard. So this brings us to the end of today's discussion. I hope this discussion helps you in your examination. Thank you very much for being here.